Our next guest today played well over 400 games in the NBA. He played for the Washington Wizards. He went on to play for Oklahoma City Thunder and the Atlanta Hawks. He's also a motivational speaker and an author. His published work includes We Matter, Athletes and Activism. Etan Thomas, you're very welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So you wrote a piece in The Guardian last month calling LeBron James this generation's Muhammad Ali, given how fearless he has been in terms of using his platform to speak out about social injustices. And I'm interested, as somebody who came up against LeBron so often early in his career, when was the first time that you identified LeBron as someone who was going to find a true, meaningful voice?
I think he started finding his voice as he got a little older in the league. He was really young when he first came in. And I played against him 3 straight years in the playoffs. We were 0-3 against him, but he 3 straight years. And as he matured and got older, you really saw him finding his voice and finding his place. And I actually participated in his documentary called Shut Up and Dribble. And I was one of the people interviewed for it. And from, you really just seen him speaking on politics, responding to Trump, talking about the different issues of police brutality and racism that are happening around the country. And his More Than a Vote initiative this year in an election that's really, one of the most important elections of my lifetime. And he's really, fighting to really fight against voter suppression. He just got congratulations from President Obama. I know he's not the president anymore, but I still call him President Obama. And, because of the work that he was doing in that particular field. So he's been doing incredible work. And why I related him to Muhammad Ali in particular was because of the backlash that he's receiving right now from the opposition, where people are actually rooting for him to fail the way they rooted for Muhammad Ali to fail because they disagreed with their stances. And not even, I don't want to say their politics, because, fighting for human rights isn't politics. It's 2 totally different categories. But with LeBron, you're seeing that a lot from the right, especially this season and the past few seasons. The whole reason why Laura Ingraham told him to shut up and dribble is because she disagreed with what he was saying. And when anyone disagrees with you, especially from the right, then it's stay in your lane, stay in your place. You're not qualified to speak on this topic. But if you're an athlete and you say something they agree with, like Herschel Walker, then they invite you into the Republican convention to have a keynote speak, a speaker position. So that's the hypocrisy. But that's the situation that we're dealing with.
If we're comparing the Ali and James curves, let's call it a curve in terms of peak popularity, and then when Ali becomes a pariah. Now LeBron is never going to become a pariah in society, but do you think his curve is at that same point when Ali was excluded from society? Is he at peak divisiveness, I guess, to use that phrase, like when it comes to riling up the right wing politics and politicians and even non-politicians in the United States? Is LeBron doing that more than he's ever done right now?
Well, when you have the president of the United States, speaking of Donald Trump, calling him names and insulting his intelligence, that means that you've riled up. You said something that has an impact. And the thing is that he's the top athlete in his craft. You combine his social media presence, he has more of a social media presence than Donald Trump. When he says something, people hear it. And that's what is the biggest threat to the right, because he has the power to influence so many people. So in that sense, yes, that's very Muhammad Ali-esque, where you have everyone's attention, you have that power, and then that makes you such a big threat. And where you'll have, I used the example, I believe in that article, I don't remember if it was that article in particular, but when the UFC fighter Colby Covington, when he won, and they orchestrated their whole thing where he was going to say something bad about LeBron, and Trump was going to call him during the press conference, and it was very poorly executed. It looked like a bad movie. But the reason why they took the time to actually, orchestrate all of that is the power that LeBron had. They wouldn't have done all that if he didn't have the power. You know what I mean? If they weren't afraid of his influence. They did all that to try to threaten his intelligence and try to influence people away from him. So that means when you have somebody like Trump putting that much attention and energy into trying to silence your voice in particular, that means that your voice is very powerful.
For sure, yeah. That Covington-Trump exchange is pretty bad pantomime. If anybody hasn't seen it, it's worth checking out for comic value alone online.
Yeah, I agree.
But as somebody who was in the league when LeBron first comes in, like you say, it took a couple of years for him to find his voice. But at the same time, was the NBA a little bit restrictive in terms of encouraging young athletes to come out and speak?
Oh, well, then under David Stern, definitely. And people forget that under David Stern, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf and Craig Hodges was whiteballed from the league. That's what happened. I was under his watch. Now, Adam Silver is completely different. He's one of the people that I interviewed. I interviewed like 50 different people in my book. You mentioned before, We Matter, Athletes and Activism. And Adam Silver, I asked him point blank, would you punish someone for speaking out and saying something that you disagree with? That's always the caveat. Because anybody can applaud someone that they agree with. That's not saying anything. Anyone does that. But when you disagree with them, then can you stand by them? And he's shown over and over again that he would. And he told that to me as well. Then he talked about how much he embraces the history of activism in the NBA. He talked about Bill Russell, and he talked about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And I was able to interview both of them for my book. And so Adam Silver is completely different. And he created a culture where athletes feel comfortable in speaking out. Now, in contrast with David Stern, it was a different culture. It was kind of like they hung over your head. The Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf or Craig Hodges might happen to you if you speak out. That was the north. So when I came in, I have a reputation of speaking out. I heard that often. So it was completely different. So I am, elated to see the shift in the culture of the NBA once Adam Silver took over the reins.
For people who aren't aware of your own backstory, when did you find your voice?
Well, I found my voice back in high school. I was in high school and I was into speech and debate. So I would write speeches about racism, about, police brutality that I experienced at a young age of being 14, 15, 16 years old. And then I just continued it as I got older. So, really what put it on a whole different level was while I was playing here with the Washington Wizards, I was speaking out against the invasion of Iraq. And, at that time, like right now, you talk to anybody from the right or the left, they'll say, okay, that was a bad idea. We shouldn't have gone in there. But at that time, as far as public figures, it was like the Dixie Chicks and like Michael Moore and Cornel West and like two other people. You know what I mean? Like nobody was really speaking because it was right after 9/11. Bush drew the comparison like to say, if either you're with us or against us. If you're against us, you're anti-American. He drew the line in the sand. And I was sitting there looking at it. I was like, wait a minute, why are we going to Iraq? What does Iraq have to do with any of this? And I'm looking at the connections, and really I had, my younger brother's friends that I remembered when I was in high school. So when I was a senior, he was a freshman. And some of them joined the military. And he was telling me how some of them are on their way to Iraq. I was like, wait, little Ed is on his way to Iraq, and he's like young. And I was like, oh, then I went to the airport one time and I saw all of these soldiers being deployed, and they looked so young and they looked so scared and everything like that. And I was like, okay, that's morally irresponsible. And then that's what made me speak out. So I was speaking out all around DC, and then it just kind of developed a reputation from there.
So you bring that idea into the league rather than getting to the league like LeBron and finding your voice as a professional basketball player. So how did you feel coming into the league at that point when you do have, I guess, a little bit of the spillover from the Craig Hodges era, the sort of whiteballing of him, and I guess the punishment for free thinking and certainly free expression when it came to political views in the 1990s. Did that ever weigh on your mind coming into the league?
Interesting. It didn't until after. So there was like one big anti-war rally in particular that I spoke at, and there was like thousands of people right on the mall in DC. And it went like viral before going viral was a thing because we didn't have social media then, and then I started, because I played with Michael Jordan for 2 years.
Yeah.
So I would see the amount of fan mail that he would get every day, like boxes and boxes. I get a letter or two here from people from college or something like that, but it was MJ. But then after that, I started getting a lot of fan mail. And some of the fan mail was positive. Some of the fan mail was very negative. Like they were very upset. And I was like, oh, wow, they were really, now it was like you're anti-American, you know, calling me the N-word, calling me you don't belong in the country. Everything that you expect to see in Twitter mentions right now, I was getting in the form of mail. And that's when I was like, oh, wow. So then other people, a few people started reaching out to me. I remember the late John Thompson reached out to me and a couple different activists. And they said, you know, you don't have any idea what you just stepped into, do you? And honestly, I didn't. Because I had been speaking at anti-war rallies around DC for a long time before that. It's just that one just got picked up and you know, went viral. And then so, you know, they kind of showed me the ropes and let me know what to expect and how to manage everything. But yeah, no, people were very upset about it. And that's when my team was supportive. The Washington Wizards were supportive. And the late Abe Pollin, you know, he actually called me into his office. And his son was actually at the rally. And so he had this big smile on his face. He was like, I'm so proud of you. And that's great. But if he would have had, you know, it just worked out that he agreed with my politics. Like he was on the same side of it. So if he would have been different, that whole scenario would have most definitely played out completely differently. Like, but I did not think about all that before. Like, you know, in hindsight, you know, talking to like my wife and, you know what I mean, my mom and my friends, they're like, you probably should have thought of that before. I was like, yeah, I didn't, but you know, thank God it worked out.
How does the hate mail compute in your head? Does it dissuade you a little bit at all?
It didn't for me. It made my wife a little nervous, to be honest with you, because some of them were really strong, and I was like, okay, maybe I need to get some security. You know, my wife was like, well, it was my wife's suggestion. Yeah, maybe we used to get a little security. So we looked into that, and you know, we didn't ever have any problems. But you know, when you get people with threats that are so strong, you know, it's hard not. And then multiple, like boxes full of people who are, you know. But it didn't dissuade me, but it showed me the power. And again, what we talked about before, like with LeBron, the fear of an athlete speaking out and using his platform. Now, I'm not on LeBron's level, but I was an athlete doing that. So I did have a platform. I did have the voice, like the media who, you know, picked up on it. I did have a level of influence from being a player with the Washington Wizards, and that was a threat to people. So, and that was just something that I had never thought of, I guess. I would always think of it as, you know, I have this platform, so I can say what I want to say, and, you know, I can influence a lot of people, like more on the positive spin of it. But I didn't think about the negative spin, about the people who are upset and threatened by that because of that platform. So, you know, it was just a learning experience.
Yeah, and sometimes it's very easy to not think about those aspects until those aspects actually arrive.
Right, exactly.
Like it's very easy for us to sit back and say everybody should be outspoken and everybody should be using their platform, but not everybody is able to appreciate the private drawbacks that come with that. And I guess the public don't understand what you were getting at the time. One of the things I'm actually really interested in from that particular period in your career is Michael Jordan. Did you ever talk politics with Jordan?
It's interesting because, and I always say this with Jordan, because now there's a different MJ. Now he's, you know, kind of evolved and he's into politics and he's talking, and he, you know, he actually put on this big fundraiser for President Obama, but before he was President Obama, and gathered all the athletes there, and I was part of it. So he's evolved now. He talks about Black Lives Matter, spoke out about, you know, police brutality a few times when different things happened, so, specific cases. So, but he wasn't like that before. To be quite honest, he wasn't. And it was something that he now regrets. But at that point, he didn't see it. And it's interesting because I saw MJ do a lot of things in the community that he didn't want anybody to know about because he didn't want the attention about anything else except for basketball. And I, you know, because I was there, I'm literally watching him. I remember after 9/11, we're sitting there in the locker room and everything is on, and the people, it's, you know, a terrible, you know, scene, and they're showing these people that lost their family, everything like that. And I was literally like, my locker was right across from him. And so I'm sitting right across and I'm watching him look at it. and he's like doing this rocking thing that he does, and he bites his lip, and he was looking and looking, and he called his guy over, and he came and he said, he told him, I want you to donate my entire salary to the family members that and he pointed to the
Right.
TV, and then he said, but not to organizations. He's like, I don't want to go through organizations. I want you to specifically locate the family members and give them directly to them. And they said, well, what about on top of? He's like, and what on top? He wants everybody to get the ration of the portion. And I'm sitting there listening to that with my own ears. And you know, it's interesting when people say things like he doesn't care about the community and he doesn't do it. And I have like 10 different stories that I can tell like that of what I physically saw him do. So I can't buy into the narrative that he never cared about the community at all. But I would say about as far as using his voice as a platform and speaking out about different things, he just didn't do it. I mean, that's the only way that you could say it. He did not do that, and it's something that he regrets.
Why do you think he regrets it?
Because he sees the power of his voice now,
right.
and you hear him speaking now, and he's talked about it. You know, but I think that he also said, even in The Last Dance, there was a small portion of it, and he said that he was so focused on basketball that was where it was like almost tunnel vision. He was referring to his days with the Bulls, and that's all that he was focused on. Like it was like nothing else. Like it was, complete blinders on. And that's the way. And he talked about regretting that or not realizing how powerful his voice was and how he could have affected change. And it's kind of just ironic because there were people like Craig Hodges who were trying to tell him that, but he just couldn't hear it. But now that he's older, I mean, you get older, you mature. You start, you reflect, you learn different things that you didn't see before. And he's in a different position now where he's not, having the tunnel vision on of playing and trying to win championships and things of that nature and thinking that he has to do it this way and this way only. So now I think if he could go back in time, he would do things differently. But that's, that you learn with age. That's the maturation process.
Yeah, for sure. It's very interesting, that 9/11 anecdote. It suggests to me, this is just guesswork on my part, that there was a slight suspicion of, I guess, certain authorities in the United States of that time that he wanted to give the money directly to the communities. Is that part of it almost, that, if you came out to, speak against a Republican senator in a Carolina election, for example, he would then have to pick the Democrat side. And perhaps the whole idea of the Democrat Party wasn't something that interested him. The whole idea of, even if you condemn one thing, you need to be part of another team. Again, just guesswork on my part, but I wonder, is that part of the way he looked at things in the late 90s?
Yeah, I don't know, honestly. I don't know. I mean, in talking about the situation in particular with, when he said the Republicans buy shoes too, and the dynamics of that, honestly, I can't even comment on it because I'm not sure. But I could just see what I've seen him do. In particular, I saw him endorse President Obama and, fundraise for President Obama and support him and use his voice and use his platform and encouraging other athletes to do the same and things of that nature. So, I could say from that standpoint, I've seen him do that, but that's an older Jordan,
Do you think that if Jordan came into the NBA 25 years later, he would have become more outspoken sooner if he was in today's generation of player?
Definitely. I mean, because and then also everything included, you have Adam Silver versus David Stern. You have a different culture. You have now it's not an anomaly for an athlete to speak out about something. Back then it was. I mean, if you think back, the only athletes that you remember are the two that were whiteballed from the league. And those are the ones that stick out in your mind. You're gonna have to really think a little bit harder to think about coming up with other athletes that were using their platforms in that way. And there's a reason for that.
Just one last question on Jordan, and it's kind of away from the idea of speaking out. And like you mentioned, The Last Dance there. The Last Dance is interesting, but in many ways, his Washington career is shrouded in way more mystery than his Bulls career ever is or ever will be. So if there was a last dance produced and it was done on the Washington Wizards, what would the last dance look like in your view?
I think it would show a whole different side of Jordan. And actually, I think they should do that. I don't know if they have the footage or not, but that they definitely should, because you saw a Jordan that was, definitely older. He wasn't the explosive Jordan that he was just athletically, but the internal battles that he had, the times where, you know, we didn't have a camera crew following us, but honestly, you don't know, because sometimes there'll be camera crews and we don't even, you know, notice them. But it's interesting. I remember one time he was sitting on the training table, getting his knee drained, and this is the second year that he played. And so, if anybody doesn't know what knee draining is, when your knee fills, he was having these knee problems, and it was throughout the most of the season. They didn't really tell the public, but he was getting his knee drained like after every game almost. And I was sitting there watching him, and because I was getting a little ice on whatever I was doing, a little stim. So the doctor came out, and there was this big needle, right? And they stuck it in him, and they pulled it out, and like it was like this black tar goo looking stuff came out. And he's sitting there writhing in pain and everything. And I asked him, I was like, why are you doing this? Like, why are you even playing? You don't need to prove anything to anybody. You're Michael Jordan. That was my question to him. Yeah. And the room fell like dead silent. Like nobody said a word, and everybody just looked at him. And he shook his head, and he looked at me again. He was like, I wish I had an answer for you. And that was it. And that, you know, that moment, it was almost where, you know, it said a lot about him, because there was this drive, and I didn't know if it was to prove to other people, to prove to himself, because he didn't ever really answer the question, but just the look that he had on his face, I could tell that it agonized him, you know? And just certain things like that for people to see, or like what I just explained before about the 9/11 thing, I think it would be, you can make a very good documentary out of those last 2 years.
Absolutely. I'm always fascinated in any athlete who has been at the very top, and then due to age, their abilities desert them.
Right.
How did Michael Jordan deal with that?
Well, I remember one game in particular where he played, I think it was against Indiana, and he didn't play well. We lost. He missed this big shot. You know, I think he ended his record of scoring double digits in consecutive games. It was I don't know, something like that. And the papers were just killing him. Like they were just like, oh, he's old. He's tarnishing his image. He should never came out of retirement. All this different stuff. So we played on a back-to-back. And I remember sitting him, because again, my locker was right across from him, and he was reading the paper. And I thought about it when I was watching The Last Dance. They were showing him reading different papers about people, right? And so he's reading the paper, and he was like rocking again. And he does this thing where he kind of hums. It's just an MJ thing. So he would hum and like look at it, and he'd bite his lip, and he would look. I'm like, man, he's reading something intense over there. You know what I mean? But he's looking at all the negative press clippings. And then that next game, he went out and scored like 50 or 40 or something crazy, and he was the oldest. He scored the many point as, what did he break? Some record where the oldest player to score that many points, something like that. And then all the newspapers were all like, King Jordan. Like, again, the same people who was killing him the day before was all like, oh, King Jordan. And I was looking at it, and I remember talking to Christian Laettner, because his locker was like right next to mine. I was like, wow, they were just killing him. And now the next day, you know, now they're just singing his praises. And he told me, he was like, you'll learn, but that's the way the media is. And, you know, and it was that moment with Christian Laettner. And I looked at him, and there's so many, like I'm saying, there's so many different, they should definitely do a documentary. I don't know if they have the footage, but there's so many different stories that they could have covered.
Wow, I completely forgot that Laettner was on that team as well.
Oh, yeah. It's funny because I grew up, and I told him this when I met him. I was like, I grew up literally hating your guts.
Yeah.
Like, I hated you. Like, I was a big Fab Five fan. Yeah. You know what I mean? And, of course, the Running Rebels and everything. But everybody, if there was a player that I could say who I hated more in college basketball than Christian Laettner, I couldn't think of one. You know what I mean? So, but then he was honestly the nicest guy. Like, he was the coolest dude. And my locker, like I said, was right next to him. I remember, calling my homeboys, and like they're asking me different questions, like, hey, so who do you hang out with the team? Like, who's cool and everything like that? I'm like, you're not gonna believe this. but one of the coolest people on the team is Christian Laettner. They was like, Christian Laettner? Like, that was the last person they thought that I was going to name. I was like, I'm telling you, he's cool as anything. But no, he's a great guy.
Yeah, he was like public enemy number one for any American basketball fan in the 90s.
Yes, like, and everybody agreed with that. So it was like no matter your race, your color, your age, everybody collectively hated Christian Laettner unless you were a Duke fan. And that was just amazing.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, I totally forgot that they were teammates for the Wizards. That's incredible. Himself and Jordan. I'm sure that was an interesting dynamic as well.
Definitely.
I just want to come back to I guess protest in sport just one last time, Etan, because like one of the questions a lot of people will have after everything we've seen this year in the NBA, obviously, but also in terms of what we're seeing in the Premier League in the UK over recent months is, you know, the Black Lives Matter protest has got so much airtime. There are players taking a knee before every game in the Premier League, for example. How does that become not just another symbol, and how do we get to a point where sports protest affects real change?
I think that the way that we'll talk about the NBA players first, but the way that they have you first utilized their platform and then went into action. So we talked about before with LeBron and formulating his More Than a Vote campaign. That is direct action that he's taking, you know what I mean, to have an impact on you know, our society. And I think that it's interesting because I was having this conversation the other day. The kneeling really bothers the right. Like, it really bothers them a lot. And they're always talking about it. And it's just amazing to me how when somebody is dedicated to twisting a message that is very clear, like, you know, even going back to Kaepernick, you know, Kaepernick took a knee and, you know, he spoke to the media for 15 minutes or however long it was, outlining why he was taking a knee and why he was not taking a knee, what it symbolizes and what it didn't symbolize. He said, this is nothing against the veterans. He said, I have family members that are veterans. It's like, it's not saying that, you know, I'm anti-American. It has nothing to do with the flag. I am specifically protesting police brutality, systemic racism, and the political process. You know, he thought that we should have more options than just Republican Democrats. That he wasn't happy with, you know, either option, Hillary or Donald Trump. So and he explained all of this in detail, very clearly, right? And then as soon as the press conference was over, they said it was a protest against the national anthem and the veterans. And I was like, okay, that means that you are specifically dedicated to misrepresenting the message. And it goes from Trump and all of his supporters on down. And it's not like they don't know they didn't hear what Kaepernick said. That's a you know, purposely done thing to be able to shift the focus. And so that's what's happened with Black Lives Matter. That's what's happened with, you know, because if you speak out against a particular case of police brutality, somehow that means that you're against all police. And they was like, no, nobody said that. Or if you talk about the fact that they need to divest funding from police officers to be able to be responsible for things that they're trained to be responsible for, you know what I mean? Which is the definition of what defund the police means. They changed that to mean abolish police, as if they're synonyms. You know what I mean? And they know the difference between the word abolish and defund. They're two different words. So people are dedicated to misrepresenting what athletes are doing and the message and what people are pushing for. And that's the part where, you know, how do you fight that? That's the question. How do you fight that? Because then people are like, okay, so what does Black Lives Matter really want? Like, what is Kaepernick really, you know, taking a knee for? Like, what's the purpose of players doing? And it's like, they're being quite clear, but they're hearing all the noise and the clutter, and then it's confusing and muddying the waters. And that's what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
We just have to keep repeating the message and saying what it isn't.
For sure. I definitely kind of didn't consider that about the whole idea of how annoyed the right gets by the symbol of the knee. And I guess that's actually reason to ensure that this keeps happening for that simple reason, because I guess anybody who supports the knee, perhaps the impact of that on a day-to-day basis doesn't impact them as much because they're fully in support of it. But in many ways, it's actually I guess what it is doing to the right and the way they are taking it that is as important.
Great. I agree.
Give us your pick for the NBA Finals before we let you go.
Well, it's hard not to choose the Lakers, you know what I mean? But I'm rooting for Miami. I love the way that Jimmy Butler is playing. I wish everybody was healthy. You know, much respect to Miami, but you know, it's hard not to root against to not bet on the Lakers if you're a betting person.